Welcome to Electric Evolution with Liz Allan. This podcast explores the transition to net zero and the systems driving real change in how we move, live and power our world. Every week I sit down with the people leading that change, those offering insight, innovation and impact in many ways people don't fully see until they hear their stories. If you're ready for real conversations that inspire action and drive change, please like this video, subscribe to the channel and join us on this journey. And let's cut through the noise and build a better future together. Hi everyone and welcome back to the Electric Evolution podcast. So today I'm joined by Tim Dexter. He is the UK Vehicle Policy Manager at Transport and Environment. We call it kind of T&E, don't we, Tim?
It's a bit quicker.
So thank you ever so much for joining me. It's lovely to see you. We've met in person, which was fantastic as well. So thank you for joining.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So I suppose I better explain a little bit how we've met as well. I think we were talking before I even knew you were going to be on the panel, but we were in London, only a couple of weeks ago now. So we're in October. And actually, we were both on this panel and I was moderating it. And there was me and you and the wonderful Sarah Sloman and Sean Keating from Believe. And yeah, really, it was a really positive panel. And I could have talked forever to you guys. And I think a lot of other people said this on customer experience. And we were looking at future-proofing EV charging for customer experience, weren't we?
Yeah, it was good. There were lots. Yeah, I think we kind of started lots of conversations that we didn't get to finish. We just basically introduced topics. But as someone that's still relatively new to kind of EV and EV infrastructure, it was nice to be on the panel with lots of big hitters.
It was honestly, yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. And like I say, that was my first time moderating a panel. But yeah, it was good. And yeah, oh, bless you. It's because I do this, do this podcast. So let's go right back to the beginning about you, because you've got quite an interesting history, especially your previous employers, haven't you? Tell us a little bit about how you got to the point of working for T&E.
Yeah, so prior to this, I was working for a health charity called Asthma and Lung UK, and I was leading the work there on air pollution. So lots of stuff around sustainable transport. And it was very on-the-ground campaigning, so supporting lots of community groups in different cities across the country, definitely in those most polluted areas. So whether that's in London, Manchester, Liverpool, Glasgow, trying to really add voice to those communities, because, we saw that as the best way to try and enact change there. The air pollution policy world can be very slow-moving, but there's also lots of stuff that can be done at the regional level, especially now we've got so many regional mayors in charge across the country, and with lots of evolution that's happened at that level. So really supporting them and making sure their voices were heard and just trying to amplify that as much as possible, which was really great to see. And yeah, as with lots of things in this area, it's challenging, but it's always nice when you get big wins, and seeing stuff like the ULEZ campaign pay off. And we had some really good news just last week or a couple of weeks ago that London's now meeting legal compliance. There's still a long way to go to get to actually kind of much healthier air, but to see it actively come down, and now that London is meeting legal compliance at least, shows it's going in the right direction, and you start to see the long-term benefits of some of those campaigns, not just the immediate policy wins, but actually the change that it can bring.
And that's fabulous. And I've had Rosamunde do Kissy Deborah on the podcast previously, so I know that she's probably going to be pretty happy about that. But and I just wanted to kind of just focus on this for a second. There are a lot of people who don't recognise the need for clean air and what is polluting not just London's air, but the rest of the country's air.
Yeah, there's a lot of complacency about it. One of the hardest things working in that area is obviously people can't see it. We describe it as an invisible threat, but if you had some way of kind of visualizing it, if it did look like the smoke off a cigarette or something, I think it would be a lot more apparent, and you'd be a lot more concerned, particularly in inner city areas where you've got these busy roads going past schools, and the impact we know that has on children. Children that grow up in highly polluted areas could have their lungs severely stunted by the time they get older. So this is life lifelong impacts that it's having on them. And like I say, I've met lots of inspiring people working in that, but not so Rosalind and the work that she has done and continues to do. It's very inspiring.
She absolutely is. And I mean, I suppose anywhere where there is a traffic bottleneck is going to be a massive pollution risk, isn't it? So that in itself, like you said, schools, people don't realise that when a child who's kind of preschool, not preschool necessarily, but kind of, well, even that, but, kind of reception age, or even sort of like quite a few early years, walking next to cars that are just parked or got their engines on, or there's bottlenecks because parents are trying to get their kids to school. Their kids and them are breathing all this in, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And it's even the small things. So we talk about the ambient air quality, so the quality that's generally around us in the atmosphere, but there's even the little things too. So there's increased risk just because children are smaller, so therefore they're closer to the tailpipe. So that increases what they're actually breathing in directly, and you can have a big impact just by making sure that you're walking away from the curbside, so a bit further away really does help. But obviously that doesn't necessarily impact I would say, the ambient air quality, which you'll be breathing in sort of day in, day out.
God. I mean, so you've got little kiddies, haven't you? We've talked about
hence
this.
the tired look.
Yeah. That I was going to say that's why you're usually kept awake in the middle of the night, actually. And I did say you look quite perky today. Sorry if you're listening, but it looks quite perky today.
A bit of an ego just before coming on air. Yeah, two little kiddies. One that's 3 years and 2 months, and one that is 9 months. And you might hear them come through the door in a minute, actually.
Oh gosh! So I was going to say, has this been part of the reason for you to move to T&E? Because you've gone from the campaigning and all of the work that you can do, but now it's just dawned on me, you're at the root cause of that in some ways, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an area that you should start to feel really passionately about, and hearing these kind of stories only really drives that. And when you start to have even more of a connection because of your own changes in circumstances, knowing people that might be impacted, it kind of helps to inspire you. But I think it also helps to make the connection about the work that you're doing. Obviously, this is slightly working more in a policy context now, but I think as a campaigner, but in a way, we're all kind of campaigners for this. You start to think about what is it that's actually driving people in their own behaviours, and what do we need to do to try and get them to think differently about these things, because everybody's got their own experiences, and that's what they're making their personal choices off. They're making their choices off, what's cheaper for them, what's more convenient, what feels is right for them. So it's not just about often like just supplying people with lots of information and data that could be quite rich and heavy, but how are you making sure that you're telling stories that are connecting to them in their day to day?
It is that. You're right. That's storytelling for sure. Let's move on to your move into T&E then. So you've only been you've been around the kind of the company for a little while now, haven't you? But will you just explain a little bit about what T&E actually do?
Yeah, definitely. So we are T&E UK. So we're the National Office of Transport and Environment, or T&E, to save time again. And T&E is the mostly based in Brussels. So we have a big office there, and that's where we were set up and founded, looking to work with and influence the European Parliament and European Commission to make sure that we're driving forward sustainable transport. How can we look to clean up our transport system, whether that's on the road, whether that's shipping, whether that's aviation, looking at the sector as a whole to make sure that we're driving that forward in a way that's sustainable, but also that's practical. Because when we're looking at these things, we know what's really important is we can't just look at kind of a drive of what's going to be greenest, but if we're going to make sure that this is sustainable and viable, we need to look at a way that's, how are we making sure that we're protecting jobs? How do we make sure that we're making people's lives easier and more beneficial? So that just transition at both ends, from manufacturing to consumer, is really important for us, because we want to make sure that we're moving forward, but that people are really experiencing the benefits of that drive to greener and cleaner transport. That has to be at the heart of kind of everything that we do.
So at the moment, and I know we had a little chat before we started recording, didn't we? There are a few things that you're involved with, and we'll talk about your charging lottery report, which is brilliant and just right up my street. But what other things are actually kind of on the agenda at the moment? Because just got stepping back a second, like you said, you're UK, you're in the UK. The organisation is European, but you're wider than that, aren't you? You're actually touching on a variety of other kind of parts of the world, really.
Yeah, I mean, it changes depending on all the different areas. So we are expanding as well into the Asia Pacific. We're starting to work with some partners out there and opening a Singapore office too, which is exciting. And that's really just a recognition of that. While it's really important to influence at the national level, we've got other national offices in France, Germany, Poland, Spain, Italy, probably somewhere else that I'm missing. So apologies to whichever office that is. While that's really important, and while the European level is really important, we know that when it comes to obviously like shipping transport, that is a global issue. This is about kind of containers that are being trapped from the Far East into Europe and back the other way as well. So we need to make sure that we're covering both sides to have that holistic view. Yeah, then in terms of what that looks like, that in for shipping and aviation, there's a lot about sustainable fuels. And that kind of ties into the road work too, because we often hear when it comes to how we can decarbonize HGVs or electric vehicles or vehicles to electric, that there's lots of transitionary fuels that are important and play a role in this, which for that sector isn't right because we know we have the solutions there already. So that's just delaying what the best choice is. And then when we're looking at that wider picture of shipping and aviation, they can't really decarbonize, definitely not as easily through electrification. So those sustainable fuels, those whether it's e-fuels, is the only way that we can do that is through those sorts of fuels. So we need to make sure that all the resources that are put into producing those are going towards sustainable aviation.
So I just want to talk about the report, the charging lottery report that came out in July this year, which I was saying to you before we started recording, I still can't believe that we're in October. But actually, in the grand scheme of things, what you did with this report is still very, very relevant. And I sat in on a webinar where you were on it and Sarah Sloman was on it, and I think it was hosted by Jill Noel, who's amazing. So can you just talk a little bit about why this report? Tell me a little bit about the report and why it was important.
Yeah, so what we wanted to do was obviously look at charging infrastructure as it exists at the moment, but go a bit further beyond just the numbers, because the numbers are really important to make sure that we're getting a good rollout, that it's in line with where we need to be for EV rollout at the moment, where they are, whether we've got the right chargers in the right places, all really essential. And we do cover that in the report and give a little bit of an update and a breakdown of what the rollout is by local authority. So we can start to see, what's the gap and what's the divide. And interestingly, and what we found is there isn't necessarily a kind of urban-rural divide or a north-south divide. It's very much individual on a local authority by local authority basis. So that kind of starts to give an indication on where some of the issues might be and what's causing the unequal rollout. But yeah, we wanted to go a bit further beyond that and actually look at how consumers were engaging with the infrastructure that exists at the moment. So we thought about how we could do a bit of a deep dive. So we were able to build an AI tool which could scrape 250,000 reviews online, and we could look to analyze those and just see what consumers were saying about those individual charge points. And yeah, it definitely came back with some interesting figures that gave some insight and led us to make a few more recommendations of what currently exists in terms of charging point regulation.
And actually, just looking at it, some of it was quite staggering. I suppose my question really was, I know that it's quite, it's early days for you in being involved in the sector, What was the biggest surprise for you that came out of this?
I think, I mean, I think for me, it was just the what the number one issue was that people were facing. So of all those 250,000 reviews, a third of them was the fact that it was a failed charge, that they weren't able to actually utilize the charge point, which is shocking. And then the next one down was slower than expected. And we'd expect this kind of thing of whether it's waiting time, whether it maybe was a bit slower than you wanted, whether it wasn't quite in the right location. But the fact they weren't able to charge at all is concerning, and I think kind of gives some insights to the fact that maybe we need to make sure that we're regulating the sector a bit better and that people are able to access those charge points. Digging into it a bit further and looking at a small sample of about 500 charges, I think, we were able to see that kind of like mapping the reviews that came in, and it suggested that only 20% of broken charges were fixed within 24 hours and 40% within 1 week, which suggests that the repair time isn't as quick as we need it. And that's despite the fact that the current charge point regulations saying that we need to have 99% of uptime for charges. And this is really important when it comes back to that story element too, because as we're trying to go about the transition, we've got what people call the early adopters through the door, and we're now moving through to the mass market, and people will do massive publicity campaigns and marketing campaigns trying to drive people to choose an electric vehicle for their next car. But if they know someone that's got an electric car, what will drive that decision more is whether they know that person's had a good or bad experience. And if that person's dependent on a charge point, but they tell them just never works, or it's always broken, or it's been broken for a week, that's delaying that other person's decision for another, 3-5 years before they're considering it. Because those are the stories that leave a lasting impact.
As you just said about the 95% uptime, because of the UK charging regs.
Yeah.
I get that. But I have a question as well. It talks about the uptime, but it doesn't talk about the repair time. So if you, and I'm not trying to be scathing or anything like that about any charge point operator at all. But and I've said this to lots of other people, any regulation that is open to interpretation, that's just what it is. It's open to interpretation. So the idea of this 95% uptime, fantastic. But what does that actually mean in your mind? Because it doesn't, to me, that doesn't say anything about and it needs to be repaired within X. That's partly, say, if we talk about a local authority, that's within their KPIs and their contract with the CPO, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it's a missing regulation. Basically, it's not really covered. That's one of the things in the report that we suggest. We say that 20% should be fixed within 24 hours, and that CPO should look to have 100% fixed within a week. And I think that feels more than fair. Obviously, there might be mitigating circumstances, whether that's a mass energy blackout within a particular area, which they couldn't account for. But within what's reasonably in their control, all charge points should be looked to fix within a week. And we'd like to see that put forward by government as part of an update to the charge point regulation. And then that kind of provides that template for councils to put into their KPIs. And it's something that charge operators know they need to meet across the country. It's just a blanket spread. And there's ways that you can look to do that, whether that's, obviously upping your own investment and resources to be able to fix charge points. But more innovatively, could you look to share those resources across different charge point operators? If they have more of a presence in one area, can you kind of make sure that you're covering each other's own charge points? There's different ways that you could look to go about that, which form part of our discussion that we had a couple of weeks ago.
And there is a thing called preventative maintenance, and we discussed that, kind of during the panel session, didn't we? Because, and I was talking to a local authority round here, or a chap from a local authority recently, and we were talking about I was saying about preventative maintenance, and from what it sounds, and I'm not being very, I'm not saying who it is, and it wasn't particularly. I'm kind of incorporating my own thoughts into what this chap said, that the unit itself, so the actual physical charger itself, was under, say, like a 3-year warranty, and this was owned by them. So preventative maintenance wasn't the top of their agenda because it was under warranty. But actually, preventative maintenance in itself, and because I've worked in service and maintenance myself, that is about, it's a bit like, I know you don't necessarily need to get your washing machine, kind of serviced or whatever, but actually if it breaks down and you haven't done any maintenance on it, it's kind of, or do you know what I mean? It's going to cost you more. So one of my old neighbours, bless him, used to say prevention is better than cure.
Yeah.
And actually that's kind of how I see this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, I think it's just about the allocation of resource and priorities, right? So if we make sure that there's a greater onus on charge point operators, which I think is what that 99% uptime was supposed to do. But while things have improved, I don't think we're still quite there. And while we need to do more to make sure that we're reaching the 99% of uptime, there's obviously bits within that we need to cover to make sure that we're really having because this is all about qualitative impact as well as quantitative, right? So making sure that people have that quality of experience when it comes to operating their vehicle as much as possible.
Because actually, and I know you know this, and I haven't actually spoken about this on the podcast before, but myself and Michelle Little, who I've been working with in Full Circle for about 4 years now, we've set up another organisation called ChargeWise CX, and it's a platform where this is exactly what we're doing with a developer. Bless him, he's brilliant, and it's to kind of highlight this. And I know we've got regulations, but actually, there's things that I believe we haven't got full sight of. We haven't got full transparency, and this can help so many people, including CPOs, recognise the potential risks of being caught out by the charge point regs, and if it's tightened up, because I've kind of worked with some councils up in Scotland, and the CPO that we were working with there, their kind of front end and service end they weren't quite aligned. So if you've got that, it means that you've got to have manual intervention to actually get the front and the back end to talk to each other. It's a bit like having one of those, what do you call them? From flipping heck, like a horse that's got people in it. Look, you see, my ADHD brain's totally gone now.
A panther horse.
You know what I mean? Where you've got it's not in the circus. Somebody's going to be shouting. I've had this before where I've had a complete brain fart. So people, if you're listening and watching, I apologise. But if you're thinking about, it's like a comedy horse type thing where people are in it. But actually, if you've got the front and the back end that are going in opposite directions, you're looking like a push me pull you, aren't you? Yeah. And this is where we need to. That was a really long way around, kind of explaining.
Analogy.
But we've got to have that level of transparency for everybody's sake. And the ultimate, like you said, the ultimate goal is getting more people into EVs. And I totally am on that, that is how I think too. And actually, if we don't get this customer and listen to the customer sentiment, we're not doing what we should be doing to get those people into those EVs.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, one of the other recommendations from our report is that there should be public reporting of broken chargers and public sentiment, because we need to make sure that we've got an overview of what the issues are. We shouldn't, we don't want to have to necessarily come back and do a big data scrape of information again to kind of see this. But if we have that public reporting, and that's publicly available, then we're able to, as a sector, as all these group of stakeholders, there's lots of people that are interested and invested in making sure that we get this right. And sometimes having that information and curing it with sunlight's the best cure. So if we have that, then we can start to take the steps we need whether that's sharing of resources, whether that's more government intervention, whether that's local authorities, what they can do to play a role in this is all really important. So I think that would be really key to make sure that it is publicly reported by local authority.
And I was going to say, the biggest thing is at some point this is going to be critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
So it's got to be, it's got to be on the button, hasn't it?
100%. And then the other side to this is obviously the people that are depending on it, because we know that for the most part, it's people who are wealthier and drive EVs. They'll be using their at-home charging, and they'll be topping up as they go about longer journeys. But people who potentially poorer or don't have access to off-street parking are more likely to rely on the public charge points. So it's unfairly impacting those people who are already possibly having to pay a lot more for their actual electricity, for their energy supply for the car anyway. But then they got a problem of actually being able to access it in the first place.
It does feel very disproportionate, doesn't it? Really, if you kind of look at it, the people who we really want to and really want them to get into an EV.
Yeah,
that we're penalising them, for the fact that they haven't got a drive, or they live in a terrace block or in a flat or somewhere like that. It's making this, and this is another of my hats, it's making it inclusive, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody, whether you're living in the countryside, living in the middle of a city, whether you're rich or poor, everybody should have the right to have affordable quality charging to make sure that we're actually going about this transition in a way that's good for everyone.
And reducing, going back to your previous role in the previous company, reducing that level of air pollution so we have less people becoming poorly. Because if you've got lots of people becoming poorly and, like you said about lung development and things like that, then it becomes a stress on the NHS, which has a value itself, so it's not just about, I could say from my husband's point of view as a climate scientist, you want to do it for the emissions, but actually for a health point of view, as in every day breathing this stuff in, that's the real important bit.
Yeah, and the transition's really key to bringing down those nitrogen dioxide levels or nitrogen oxide levels in general. And today, it's very timely that we're having that discussion, because they've just started the court case on Dieselgate, where you've got all the manufacturers being taken to the High Court by over, I think it is, car owners who were duped by manufacturers into buying cars that emit a lot more. And it's mad to think this started 10 years ago. God. And the case that starts today, if it goes all the way, might go on for another 2 years. So it's such a thing. And all those cars are still, there's plenty of them still on the road today that are still emitting far more than what they claim that they did when they were first put out there, which just highlights the need as to why we need to speed up that transition.
And I won't even go into anything about the kind of the incentives that were out there previously for diesel. So we won't. Let's not touch on that one. But the report itself also looks at rural charging, doesn't it? And you've got some figures in there about what the disparity for rural charging is. Can you just kind of explain a little bit on that one?
Yeah, I mean, so what we found when it comes to the actual rollout of chargers, that there's a lot of places in rural communities that are doing really well in Wales, across England. That it's not necessarily whether it's a rural or urban divide that's the big issue here. And of course, you'd expect people probably in rural communities to have access to the off-street parking anyway. So it's making sure that we've got the ability for people that are going on longer journeys about those communities or through those communities to have access to charging points to be able to top them up as they go. So it really, I think when it came down to what the big barriers are for local authorities and being able to actually roll out and increase the numbers, it's hard to say because of the lack of data and available information. But I think anecdotally, a lot of people would say having a really good person or a good team that's willing to put in the time to really push this forward internally in the local authority, or be willing to put the time to make bids to pitch for some of the government grants that are out there.
I mean, it's not easy for local authorities. I mean, like I say, I've been talking to a few, and they get kind of they've got their job, which has got it's a bit like an onion. There's lots of layers to it, so they're not necessarily just, even if kind of, they could be doing highways, they could be doing this, they could be doing that. I mean, somebody, and I can't even remember which council it is, but one of the councils that I know, um, somebody who's looking after EV charging also looks after crematoriums. So there's all of this,
Interesting job
and they're
description, isn't it?
well, they're running on a shoestring in some ways, aren't they? Because kind of, it's just not easy for them. So I get you, and we kind of could do with that support, or them actually fund them needs. It would be good to have that kind of, those people inside the local authorities, but kind of the Levi funding, the capability funding isn't always going to fund a person. Sometimes it's going into a funding pot, isn't it, to
Yeah.
help the council, and it's just laid again onto that person's job role. So that's not easy. It's about trying to help them as well. And again, that's the same what we're trying to do on kind of the platform side. But
Yeah. Availability to information, be able to make that business case and make it a bit easier. But also we want to have that kind of that, the government overview, that it shouldn't necessarily be dependent on, and while it's great and these people are amazing that they're driving it forward internally and absolute heroes of this, but also it shouldn't be dependent necessarily on a council being lucky enough to have that, because then we see some places who just haven't been able to prioritize that, because we do know the constraints local authorities are under, that it would be great to have government have the more overarching look and utilize some of the information such as been pulled out in our report and is highlighted by lots of people to say, this is where the gap is in the network, and that's what needs to be filled, and that's what needs to be prioritized.
because it's not easy. I mean, so would you say there are other barriers for the local authorities, to kind of, when it comes to delivering consistent charging experiences for the residents and the visitors? Are there other things that you found?
Yeah, I think making sure that there's a possibly more of a consistent picture in terms of what they're asking for when they're working with charge point operators. That's really key, because you'll have some people that have experience of this, some people who are kind of, it's like you say, just being added onto their job title. So if there's a way to make sure that it's either standardized through the government and you've got more support to be able to do that, or are you working more closely with local authorities that have had this experience before, so you really understand where are the potential pitfalls, what it is that you need to be looking out for, just sharing that experience, that information, just that knowledge base, which is really approaching this definitely for the first time.
I mean, and when it comes to the contracts between the local authority and the charging networks, because of the kind of the return on investment side of things, the local authorities signing up to 15-year contracts, aren't they? So that is a significant amount of time. It's not like you'd have a mortgage with a kind of a fixed rate for 15 years. Normally the turnover and the turnaround for this is a lot different. I'm not trying to pull you into a conversation that points fingers, but what are your thoughts on that?
So yeah, that consistency is really important, but also one of the things that we need to remember is also that to make this work, we need to make sure that there's a viable business case for charge point operators. One of the things at the moment, while we've had this really good rollout, and while it's really important that continues, definitely as we see more electric vehicles being rolled out there, we're getting to a point where we're fairly consistently seeing a quarter of all new vehicles sold as electric, and starting to overtake petrol sales as well, which is fantastic. We need to make sure that there is that business case, and at the moment, from what we pulled out in our report, is that 16% of utilization in terms of time by charge points, but there's all percent utilization in terms of energy. So that's in terms of the actual energy that could be provided. That's only 4% right now. So it's very hard to make that business case when it's quite so low. So to help support local authorities, how can we make sure that there's that appeal when approaching and kind of putting these things out to tender?
So hang on, right? So you just said you've got 16%. It's showing it from the report you've done. You've seen 16%. It's showing a 16% utilisation
Of
but only
time.
but only 4% energy, which would be what they be get what the what the charging network would be getting money, for. Oh my God, that's massive.
Yeah, it's huge, and so it's hard to continue to make that case until we start to see that go up. But obviously, we need to make sure that the rollout continues to be supported, and we'll probably start to see that anyway as we reach the next round of the transition. We start to get. We did some analysis where we're looking at about 21 models of EVs on the market by 2027 that are under £27,000. So we start to get the cheaper mass market vehicles that are rolling out, and these then do start to appeal to people that on lower incomes, are much more affordable. You could get a lower leasing agreement, and possibly in that market where they're less likely to have a driveway, so more dependent on that off-street parking. So we might start to see that utilization go up, and there'll be greater demand for them in general too, where people are parking on the street, whether that's from lamppost charging, etc. So we are starting to get to that point where it will tip over. Definitely looks that way, but it's just something that we need to bear in mind as well from the CPO perspective.
Did you? And I don't think, I'm not sure you did, but have you, or are you thinking about looking at the local authorities and their cross-payment solutions, or is that more difficult to kind of pull data for?
That's difficult to pull data for, so it's not something we've been able to go through. But it would be interesting to see some more information.
Yeah, because I know that there are some local authorities that are a bit reticent to kind of integrate, kind of cross-pavement solutions, and I'm going to be talking to somebody in the next few weeks who I'm hoping to bring on the podcast, who are they're bringing. I think they've actually introduced 4 different cross-pavement solutions at pilot level to try and see how it goes. So there's some that, I suppose it depends how risk averse your council is as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think there was something out today from Heidi Alexander, the Secretary of State for Transport, about the money that's been made available to local authorities for introducing gullies as well as a cross pavement solution. I mean, it's interesting, and it feels kind of necessary in the immediate, but then we're also left with the issue of if you are living on a road, how will you be able to guarantee the fact that you're able to park outside your front door? Very busy roads, that can be hard depending on what time you get back and the difficulties with that. And there are lots of things to consider, and it might be that it's right for some people but not right for others, and we need to make sure that we're kind of having that holistic view. If it's not right for others, we still need to make sure that that you are, as we've said, that you can actually access a charging point that works, but also that's affordable, because at the moment it's not necessarily affordable, and they're not getting the benefit from the EV that they should be. When you're able to really experience the benefit of cheap charging if you're charging at home on your own energy network, that's not necessarily the case. And are you making much more of a saving as you would be if you were driving a petrol car? And the point is that they absolutely should be, and they could be, but that's not the case at the moment.
So I was in a meeting at Everything Electric last Friday. I know you went on the Saturday, didn't you? And someone in the meeting was talking. I'm sure there was some stats that either they had pulled or someone they knew had pulled with regards to the kind of the number of people who could park outside their house, on a regular basis. I mean, I know as British people, we're not that good at talking to each other, unless you're up north, and then we just talk to anybody. But kind of down the southeast, if you're, there is that sort of, you can't talk to that person. But actually, whoever it was, and I think it was in the southeast, they were talking about, kind of, you could either park outside or at least one down from, from where your house was. which means that the cross-channel solution still works. But also on the other side, there's also the gantry arms. So there was another chap in there in the meeting talking about the, kind of the arm, the kind of the charging arm, that because the cross pavement channels aren't going to work for everybody, especially somebody, for example, who's in a wheelchair and who can't kind of get the cable in and out that easily. So again, it's about looking at different solutions that fit correctly, isn't it? For trying to make sure that we include as many people as possible in this transition.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, making sure that we've got innovative solutions for that as well. And yeah, we do want people to be experiencing it, and it needs to be right. But again, not every solution is going to be right for everyone, whether that's kind of from the gully or whether that's the gantry. I think the last time that I lived in a terrace house, it was a good 5 or 6 meters. That feels like quite a substantial structure to have going over your front garden, over the pavement, and then out to the car as well. So we know all the various different roads and types of housing that we get in the UK. There's lots of different problems that come with each one.
But it is like
We do have
if it's not manageable if the gully solution isn't manageable for certain people, there's got to be other options. But I know that the regular, kind of the regs that are coming out at the moment, or the mandatory requirements, are kind of more looking at the kind of the channels in the pavement. And I've talked about this before on the podcast, because I've had a couple of the cross pavement solution companies on, and we've had these water channels for a long time. They've just been. I remember going up to Oxford a couple of years back and going, "Oh, look, there's one of them," and it was just a water channel, cut into the pavement. So we have had them. It's not as if they've not been around, but yeah, it's all of these things. All of these things are really important. Do you know what? I want to go back to the thing, because this is kind of blowing my mind about what you said about utilisation.
Yeah.
I know, if you don't mind me asking,
Right,
we have got other things to talk about, and I'm keeping an eye on the time too. But what? Right. So you said 16% utilisation, but 4% energy. Where the heck is the difference? Did you suss out that? Is that just...
We didn't dig into it. It was obviously just a little point to see where some of the issues might be. But I mean, I guess that's just people that might be using a charging point overnight, just plug it in because they don't have off-street parking. That probably makes up for that. Plug it into one on their road. But so yeah, obviously you could assume the gap is people that are overstaying beyond their 100% charge.
But could it also open a can of worms with regards to faulty chargers as well? Going back to what you just said earlier on about that, kind of the chargers not being repaired within the timescale that you'd expect. Do you think there's going to be something there? God, this if it is that we are looking at a can of worms, aren't we here?
Yeah, I don't know. We haven't done it, so I wouldn't like to say. It would be interesting to look into the impact on that. It could be a fact of downtime playing a role in that too. I mean, yeah, you wouldn't. It would definitely, any downtime would obviously be impacting it, but I mean, it still leaves a massive gap in terms of energy utilisation.
I suppose the people who would be able to understand that would be the energy providers, wouldn't they? So
it's having that depth of information and that ability to kind of really dig into these things in the way that.
God, that'd be a while. Right, let's move on. Oh my goodness! So I know we've talked a lot about consumer sentiment, but I think we covered this a little bit during the panel session, but actually maybe we haven't, because in your report you were talking about reducing VAT on public charging. How feasible is that? Because I've had other people having different thoughts on it, to be honest.
I mean, it should be very feasible, because one of the government's priorities is, as has been reiterated today by the Secretary of State, is trying to get people into electric cars and supporting that and making sure that that's viable, that's affordable. And we know that the ability to access charge points, affordable charge points, is one of the biggest barriers to this. So, taking away that and making sure that it's in line with, it's not about removing it completely, but it's in line with the energy that you get at home, which is at 5%, and we pay 20% of the charge point. That's obviously a big part of the energy cost. So I think that would be huge. And also another recommendation we've got in there is making sure that sustainable electricity going towards charging is part of the renewable transport fuel obligation too, just to really make sure that we've got that supply, and that it starts to benefit operators too by bringing down the costs.
But I mean, yeah, as I know that the charge point operators are having, their standing charges went up massively, didn't they? Of something like 400% for a standing charge. I mean, good grief, that's, even if they can address some of that, then hopefully it'll start kind of bringing the prices down. But I'm going to ask you a question that is a little bit of a naughty one. Is government listening? When we talk about things like this, are they listening?
I think they are. I think whether it has an impact, these things are they could be long and they could be painful, but I think that they are listening. And I think as we start to tell this consumer side of the story again, that's why it's really important. These things all work together. And like we said before about there being lots of stakeholders and lots of people that are interested in making sure that this works, we've got to combine these things together. We've got the ZEB mandate in place. We've got this necessity for manufacturers to produce, some of whom that are based in the UK. We've got Nissan plant. We've got Jaguar Land Rover. We've got Mini. We're producing Ford powertrains up in Halewood in Liverpool. There's a great benefit to this transition here. The next stage is we need to make sure that it's working for consumers. And, it is for a lot of consumers at the moment. They get those benefits. But as we get to the next stage, how can we make sure that it's working for them too? So we're continuing to drive that demand that, is moving us towards making sure that we're meeting our net zero target. The ZEV mandate is the biggest decarbonisation policy that we've got in the UK. So it's huge. But it's also great because it's a great industrial policy too, because it makes sure that we're keeping up pace with foreign competitiveness in terms of EVs too. So, we've got a lot of these things in place at the moment. We just need to make sure that we're continuing to progress on them. And I think that's the way to tell the story, because it is all part of one package, and telling that story and making sure that it goes back to people who are, at that point of considering what car are they going to buy next.
So as one final question then, are there, because obviously you're working with other countries at T&E, are there other countries where we could take a lesson from, or who we could take a lesson from with regards to what's been working for them that we're not currently doing?
Ooh, that's a great question. I mean, there's lots of little bits, and it's kind of vice versa too, because there's lots that they can learn from us. We need to remember to kind of congratulate ourselves a little bit on the things we're doing right, and remember that we're doing them right and they're working. The ZEB mandates a far more ambitious policy than what they've got in the EU. So it's helping to drive out rollout quicker than there. So, that gives us a competitive advantage in some ways. So that's really important. But then in other countries, you've got other things that you could do, such as making sure that we're maybe more fairly taxing polluting cars and bigger cars too. In France, you've got that. You've got, I think the tax rate on a BMW X5 is 20 times more in France than it is in the UK. So in France, you're paying £66,000 for the acquisition tax. And it's less than that in the UK. So we're paying just over £3,500. So, that's a huge difference. And obviously that's, a very extreme way of doing it. But it just goes to show that some of the solutions out there can be more bold, and that you don't need to necessarily tinker around the edges, but taking those big steps sometimes is key to making sure that you're helping with this.
And do you think we're going to see it?
I think I'm always hopeful. I think we're going to start to see progress. This is something that needs to happen. Right? We know the direction of travel. It's, do we want to really make that ambition now and really set some bold targets for the near term, or do we want to struggle in the future? Do we want to be lagging behind? People are still suffering with kind of people, particularly on lower incomes, having to buy very expensive to run petrol and diesel cars or hybrid cars, which are still reliant on mostly petrol and diesel. Do we want to make sure that we've got a automotive industry in the UK in 10 to 15 years' time? Or do we want to be subject to lots of cheap imports from overseas? It might mean that for 2 or 3 years, we really need to get on with it and actually go about it. But this is the long-term benefit.
I think on that note, I think we're going to finish, aren't we? Because there's a lot we've unpacked that shed load today, Tim.
Keep going.
Oh my God, yeah. Well, this is kind of I think we had 40 minutes for our panel session, and we've had just over 50 now on this, and that's just me and you talking. Imagine if all of us turned up. My goodness, maybe I should do that. Maybe I need to get us all in together. But listen, it's been fabulous talking to you. So interesting, and I love the fact that you know of the background that you came from, and what you're doing now. Just it's brilliant, and I'm going to keep an eye out for all of your reports in future. Definitely.
Send them direct.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. Into my inbox. Thank you very much.
Make it easy for you.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim. It's been an absolute joy talking to you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, bless you. Well, look, so on that note, I'm going to say to everybody else, thank you for watching and listening. I always say it, please like, subscribe, share with all these wonderful friends and family that might actually be interested in this kind of stuff, and work colleagues. Take a look at our LinkedIn, Electric Evolution LinkedIn page, and we are on YouTube and all sorts. So just check it out. But on that note, again, I'm going to say thanks, Tim, and thanks for everybody for watching and listening. I'll see you next time. Bye. Thanks for watching Electric Evolution with Liz Allan. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you're a charge point operator, local authority or stakeholder in EV charging, I'd love to talk to you about our Charge Point Evolution framework. It's designed to help you create a seamless EV driver journey, boost utilisation and maximise your return on investment. Alternatively, if you know someone who'd be a great podcast guest or might be interested in sponsoring an episode, you can email me on liz@fullcircleci.co.uk. Thanks again for watching.